Well, Hobbs, we will get started with the Fast Five. Our first question, what's your
My
name?
name is Hobbs Magaret. Hobbs is my mother's maiden name, so everybody always thinks my name is Margaret Hobbs, which is totally understandable, but first name is Hobbs, last name is Magaret. Apparently a French name that may or may not have been misspelled at Ellis Island somewhere in the late 1800s. So,
Oh,
so
yes.
I'm a mishmash. So the only solution is get so famous everybody knows how to pronounce my name.
Right, and we will work on
Mm.
that today. We'll try and get you to a few more years, and
That's
hopefully
right.
that'll
Everybody be
help.
like, no, I know how to pronounce his name. It's not Kamala. It's Kamala.
Right,
Although I
exactly.
don't. I hope my trajectory ends up being a little bit better than hers, though.
True. Yeah. Our second question, what's the name of your...
I am between farms right now, but I work for a company called Paneri Agricultural Company in Australia. So I had Sister's Cattle Company for several years. Sold that. That one did really well. The vegetarians in Portland couldn't get enough of the grass finished beef. Everybody loves a steak. It's just certain people have a increased sense of guilt when they eat it. So if you can absolve that, you increase your clientele. Then we moved down here to Texas during COVID. Bought a ranch, ran that for several years, and then my parents split up. We had to sell the ranch. Luckily, that was right about the time my consulting career kicked off. And that company was called Fire and Salt, which is now closed. And then I started working for Paneri, which has actually been the best thing for me. It's been a hugely advantageous experience. I mean, they have 3.2 million acres, a little over
Oh,
10,000
wow.
cows. It's a $120 million asset base undertaking. And luckily, I've been tasked with developing the business plan and the genetics and the ecological integration. And it's super cool because they're a carbon developer who has ended up with a bunch of cattle stations because the carbon income on these places is really good. Basically, Australia started saying, okay, can you guys please do early season burns in the tropical savanna so the late dry season burns don't just destroy everything. So now burns are only about 10% of what they were 10 years ago across
Oh,
tropical
yeah.
Australia. But the problem is we were talking about genetics earlier, all the cattle up there were bred to do well on country that burned every year, so there was a big flush of green grass everywhere. So now they have this inherent contrast where they have lots of old, dead, moribund forage that needs to be eaten rather than burned, and they have cattle, big framey Brahman cattle, that have been performing for the last 50 years on all this burned, fresh green regrowth. So the challenge there is to shift the genetics in a way that can do well and get a weaning rate over 50%, which is it's currently under, and then create a market for that, or create a product that is marketable. So it's a big challenge, big puzzle, and also learning how to deal with the corporate politics has always been interesting as well. So
Oh,
it's certainly been, I guess they call it the palace intrigue of corporate politics. There's quite a lot of that. So, learning how to navigate that to make a difference at scale has been quite a challenge, quite difficult, but also pretty rewarding.
oh, very interesting. And you mentioned that's located in Australia. Where are
I'm
you
in Lufkin,
located at?
Texas, in East Texas. For now, who knows where we'll go from here?
And I think you mentioned earlier, Sisters was in
Oregon,
Washington,
yes, sir.
Oregon. Yeah. And what year did you start grazing animals?
I grew up in the ranching business, so I was my earliest memories are hanging out with my granddad in the feed truck. But the first time I was responsible for my own bank account and my own payback was 2018.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And have you always focused on cattle?
Yes. I don't have any experience with sheep or goats or bantang or water buffalo or anything like that.
Banting. We have not had a Banting breeder on the podcast, so that's an area we
I
could
saw
include
one.
in.
I saw one when I was in the Northern Territory in April. It was just they're incredibly genetically adapted. Just these
Oh, yes.
sausages of an animal. They come from Southeast Asia, and it's just they have this just
Yes.
white spot on their butt. So when they're running away from you through the brush, you just see this white spot getting smaller. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, very interesting. That is the animal in the U.S. that I think is really interesting. This is a full blown tangent, but those scimitar oryxes,
Interesting.
onyxes, or I think it's oryx. Just they're compact, but they look like they have enough meat on them. And, people say the meat is really good.
Is that an exotic animal?
Yes, it's
Okay.
from Africa. Yeah, yeah. Texas, a lot of the hunting game ranches down there have lots of them. It's one of those breeds. Sorry, it's one of those species that is endangered in the wild state, but are very prolific in management or captivity.
Yeah, I've heard there are like 10 times more captive tigers in Texas than there are in the world, than the wild in the world.
Yeah. I wish I could say that surprises me, but it doesn't.
Oh yeah, it's a crazy state, Texas.
Well, we exotic Joe up here.
Oh yeah,
north
that
of
was a
you,
great.
so,
Yeah, the Tiger King. Oh man, that was great.
Yeah, Tiger King. Yeah. Joe Exotic. Yeah, Tiger King. Joe Exotic. Yeah.
Oh man, that's a great watch. I should rewatch it. I think it's been long enough now.
Yeah, we watched it during COVID. It's probably about time to watch it and just see how it was crazy back then. And with the new stuff that's came out, I'm sure it feels even crazier.
Yeah, is he still in prison? Anybody know?
As last I knew he was, or last thing I believe I saw he was, but he'd appealed or had contacted Trump trying to
Nice.
get
Well,
a
somebody
pardon.
needs to make a ranching show where they give him a ranch
Oh boy.
and we just watch Joe Exotic do high density grazing. I think that would be super entertaining.
That would be must-see TV.
I'm ready.
Yeah, that would
Watching
be.
him get shocked with the electric fence would be awesome.
Yes, it would. It'd be very interesting. Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, the podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of grass-based livestock producers and exploring regenerative practices that improve the land, animals, and our lives. I'm your host, Gal Hardage, and each week we'll dive into the journeys, challenges, and successes of producers like you, learning from their experiences and inspiring each other to grow and graze better. Whether you're a seasoned grazer or just getting started, this is the place for you. If you're looking to grow your profits, elevate your grazing operation, or just want to get your hands dirty, Noble Research Institute can help, no matter the size, location, or scope of your operation. Noble's 2- and 3-day educational courses were designed to build real-world skills in regenerative ranching. Noble Land Essentials helps you harness the power of your soil for better forage, better livestock, and better returns. Noble Grazing Essentials demonstrates how to optimize forage use to get the best from your livestock and grazing land. Noble Profitability Essentials can help you improve your business skills with financial tools to maximize your ranch's profitability. And Business of Grazing offers ways to make your grazing strategies work for your bottom line. Scholarship and grant opportunities are available for those who qualify. Visit noble.org to learn more about these courses and enroll today. For 10 seconds about the farm, we received a little bit of rain, and anytime it rains in early August, actually just in August, we're happy. I'm always glad for a rain. I haven't checked the rain gauge to see how much, but it's been nice. It looks like some people to the west of me and north into Kansas, they've gotten quite a bit more, but we got some, and I'm looking forward to the results from that, or the effects of that. For 10 seconds about the podcast, we've had really great response to the last couple of episodes about ultra-high density grazing or total grazing. We have Hobbs on today, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation with Hobbs. Just want to plug his book. It's a nice, easy weekend read. You can get it on Amazon. I've really enjoyed it, so I encourage you to get it. And with that, let's get back to Hobbs. Now, you mentioned high density grazing. Where'd you even get started with high density grazing?
Well, I guess the first time I heard of it was Alan Savory's podcast, where he was, cultivated the idea of keeping all the animals grouped up and moving, which was a big light bulb moment for me. Most importantly, not because, oh, this is a better way to graze, but suddenly there was a deeper, more spiritual component to grazing itself. Oh, it's part of the blueprint of the planet. Oh, this is how nature is designed. Oh, well, maybe ruminants have a more fundamental purpose to the fabric of reality than just providing steaks. And then, like, these tumblers just started falling and everything just locked into place. And I was like, oh crap. So I started, this was actually after my career as a composer, which actually did quite well, and just didn't have that meaning for me. I was marginally successful. I did all the theme music for 3 of the tennis majors one year: Australian Open, Wimbledon,
yes.
and the French Open, Roland Garros. That was kind of the zenith of my accomplishment. So, I was doing pretty well as a composer, but it just wasn't. Having come out of the ranch world in the Panhandle of Texas, it's just not close to my heart enough. So I left and started trying to figure out how I was going to get back into the industry. And, it was actually introduced to me, Alan Savory's work was introduced to me by Butch, the guy who runs Ranch Lands. I was interviewing with him for a job. And so he mentioned it and I watched it. I was like, oh, boom, quite the transformational moment for me. And then I started applying for all these jobs and ended up applying for a job in Virginia and flew out there to interview and was introduced to Zietzman's book. And just once I found Zietzman's book, it was all over, because he cracked the code in terms of genetics and grazing. All of this is to say he cracked the code on how to do it, but it wasn't until many, many years later that I understood the why. And I thought that I understood the why pretty deeply and pretty completely. So that's why I wrote my book, actually, interestingly enough. And there's a gentleman named Eric who helped me put this together about what my book actually is. And he sent me a message on Instagram saying, thank you for unfolding the why of what we do so well. And I realized, oh, that is what I was doing. Because I was trying to go right down to the root of why we're doing everything ecologically, economically, philosophically, spiritually. Like, why is this the right thing to do? So building that case over the course of the book. So that's where I heard about high density grazing, and so Alan Savory and Johann Zietzman were my introduction into high density grazing, and it became a ridiculous obsession. Nobody could talk to me at parties anymore, and I didn't have any friends for a long time, and so now because after that I spent 7 years just standing around cattle all day, and I actually did the math. I walked, I think, from New York to Los Angeles and back in the course of that 7 years, building temporary fence.
Oh, yes.
So
yeah, that sounds
it was crazy, something like 11,000 miles. So it was pretty wild, but high density grazing, it's definitely an interesting key that the world needs more of.
So I'm gonna make a assumption here, and I'm assuming the ranch you grew up on did not utilize high density grazing or even a daily rotation.
No, it's the ranches that I grew up on were a function of the horse mythology, the Western horseman, where the horse is far more important in the spiritual orientation than the cow is. And that's the big transformation I've had in my life, is that the ruminant is far more important as a grazier than the horse is important as a tool. For so long, the horse was the most important technology that allowed humanity to gather protein effectively. Like, I get that, but I think we're at the point of a transformation. And so, my people were all big horse people. My granddad, all the pictures of my granddad, he's on a horse or holding a horse. I have his spurs and his saddle with his name on it and all that. So it's such a huge part of the mythology growing up. And so when I kind of woke up to the fact that this is an ecological undertaking rather than simply let's call it a personal mythological undertaking, then there's a big transformation for me. And it turns out it's still, as you know, everybody's still far more enamored by the horse in the ranching world than they are by the cattle. You can see that simply by virtue of the fact that that rodeos are still such a huge thing. So to answer your question, yes, or rather no, there was no rotation. It was all big pasture grazing. Go get all horse managed, which I don't want to be antagonistic to the horse driven culture. A lot of people love their horses, and I certainly want to be inclusive of everyone to some reasonable degree. But I think that what's happening right now is the transition of recognizing that the cow is preeminent. Not the cow is preeminent, not the horse. So
jump into Oregon. So when you started producing beef in Oregon, you started with that mindset of the ecological, the principles of that rather than production of beef. So you were doing high density grazing with that in mind?
Yes, so I figured out pretty early on that if you really want to think about the future, just imagine you're in Star Wars. So if you're imagine there's a grazing planet in Star Wars, and there's a ship that your ship has a problem, and the closest place you can be that you can set the ship down is some grazing planet in Star Wars, and you land. What does that look like to you? Are they like it looks like a completely and totally automated, optimized, probably drone-driven system where the ecology of the planet has been completely optimized for the most life per cubic meter, and the cattle have been genetically selected for the ability to do their job ecologically as opposed to producing carcass traits, and so then they would have big automated harvesting facilities, and then they would freeze it and ship it off world, right? So you think about it from the ecological standpoint, and you throw out the carcass traits. In Star Wars, if people were breeding cattle from carcass traits, they would be creating it in a lab. They would create it in a lab, or they would have some prison-looking planet where the cows stood around all day and in a concrete box or something, and were fed specific rations that would create the perfect carcass outcome that would then be slaughtered and sent to the rich people in Coruscant or whatever, which is this central planet in Star Wars for those of you who don't know that. And yes, I am a bit of a Star Wars geek. I think it's an amazing universe. And so when you think about what the future of grazing should look like, just imagine you're in Star Wars and you realize that everything is ecologically oriented rather than protein oriented. And so then then you start asking yourself, well, what are the things in our culture that are maybe hidden in our ranch culture, our grazing culture, our farming culture, that are maybe a little bit hidden or transparent to us, but are actually driven by the protein outcome. And that's actually another reason why I wrote my book, is I wanted to say, okay, let's strip this whole thing down. And what would it look like if we had a completely and totally ecologically driven philosophy that then became manifest in the way that we deal with cattle? So it would look quite different than what we have today. So in the very beginning, I as Justin Bieber says, I clocked it that this was a natural asset play. This is an ecological orientation play, and quite frankly, if I got into the cattle business and tried to compete with people who are already at scale and already have the economy of scale, already have the expertise to race to the bottom and produce the most amount of beef with the least amount of cost on land that they have already owned for generations, then there was no way I was going to succeed, because I didn't have the expertise in that, and also there's no story to tell. So I recognized early that it was a performance art as much as it was a performance art and an ecological play as much as it was a protein production effort. So I got my little group of cows, and I found unused land that was in a very conspicuous location, and I moved them 4 times a day at super high density right next to the highway. And over time, people were like, what the heck's going on? And people got interested, and people started throwing money at it. And at the same time, I started doing really well on social media, and I just had the courage in the very beginning to look like a totally crazy person. It's in 2018 nobody was doing that, especially in Central Oregon. It wasn't common at all, and still to this day almost nobody's doing ultra high density grazing like Johan or Jaime or Joel. It's still this sort of it's still rotational grazing is as you know kind of the king in this new sort of regenerative movement. But the ideal, and I think the ideal is always important because it gives you something to aim at, is a ultra high density non-selective graze. That's how I started. I went hard from the very beginning.
Yeah, you jumped in on the deep end. You mentioned the performance art aspect of it. And when you say that, what I'm hearing is you got where you could be seen, you shared it on social media, you shared your journey. Is that what you mean? I don't want to make a assumption.
I shared my journey, and I gave myself a platform for my crazy ass thoughts, basically. So, yeah. And also in the beginning, I was very happy to be antagonistic to people and to pick fights on the internet, and that waned as time went on. And now I've gotten to the point where I find a lot more value in being inclusive and meeting people where we can connect and trying to figure out the best way to move forward. Not to say that there's not value in being antagonistic at times. If you're too agreeable too much of the time, people are just going to walk all over you. That's definitely something I've done poorly as well in the past. But the performance art is make yourself, as you said, put yourself in a place where you can be visible and be as different as you can, and be afraid to say what's true. If it's true and it's necessary, go ahead and say it. Because what's the old adage they have in marketing, that you have to either be the first, the best, or different to make a splash.
Oh yes.
So
yeah.
I was trying to be the best, first, different one, and if I failed at any one of them or two of them, I still had one. So that was my goal.
And that sounds a lot like Mike Michalowicz's book, Get Different, on his marketing approach. You've got to not do what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been my biggest challenge with the Australians is, they want to have the best, most ecologically integrated plan. But when I say, okay, here's what you need to do, the people on the ground are like, no, but I love my Brahmins that have a 46% weaning rate. I can't change my Brahmins. Plus, the market loves the Brahmins. And so anyway, it's been a big challenge there, and I've learned a lot.
Yes. So after Oregon, you moved to Texas, and you continued along the same path.
Yes,
in Texas.
but a very different forage base.
Well, that was my next question was, how does that compare and contrast to Oregon? Because those are very different.
Oh yeah, man! I thought I was the king shit in Oregon. Everything was so easy. Everything was good. The cattle were in great body condition. We were up at 3,000 feet elevation with really high protein forages, had access to some irrigation, and I thought, man, I'm just going to go to Deep East Texas, where it rains all the time. We can graze year round.
Yeah.
And then I got the education of low protein forage, which took me a year to really understand how that worked. So and it was a brutal combination of factors. I got these. So okay, I'm going to use the most nativized cattle possible. So I bought a bunch of Coriani cows that came in on January with very little forage available, and they were calving in January in the cold. Totally off season, where the conventional guys love them to calve in January, early February, which is one of those things that's completely and totally unecological. If you were ecologically orienting it, you would say, okay, when do the deer drop their babies? And that's when I would drop my babies. So that's one of those little areas we were mentioning that potentially transparent to people, where the protein outcome is driving decision making rather than the ecological outcome. Anyway, so I got these Coriani cows. Then they came in January, and then So they didn't have any idea about a high density grazing system. So it took a couple of months to get them used to the electric fence. Stopped jumping out of the paddocks. I learned very quickly that I couldn't graze these Coriani cows as tightly as the British cattle that I was running up in Oregon, and So I had to figure out what was the nice balance there. And after about a year of struggling, and the first summer was incredibly terrible, brutal drought as well, and a ton of people had to sell out. And I didn't have to sell any cattle, and I actually ended up with I still had a third of my forage base because of the grazing style that I was using available when it finally started raining again at the end of the summer. Everybody else had sold out, but I still had a third of my forage left, and so I was able to make it through the year without selling any cattle, and then make it through the winter with only feeding hay for a couple of months, which was pretty good for my first year. So it was a grazing win, but it was a big fertility loss, because the next year I only got like 65% calving rate, because these cattle were they weren't adapted, they didn't know what was going on, and it was a tough year, and I pushed them too hard. So I learned a ton in that first year. But the next 2 years got a lot better, because I figured out what the hell was going on. And we can revisit that when you get to the overgrazing part. Although I'm sure Jaime covered that in detail on your previous podcast. And he helped me a lot in that first year as well.
And when were you introduced to him?
When I was in Oregon, I found him. He was mentioned in Johan's book, so I cold call people, man. I don't care. I'll pick up the phone. I'll call anybody. I'm happy to do that. That's how I got to working with the Australians. When I was in Oregon, I was like, okay, this is an ecological play. Who's doing that? And then I found the people who were writing the carbon credit methods. And I cold called them and started this relationship, and then one thing led to another. They came and visited my property eventually down in Texas, and it started this long relationship that we have now. So, that's another thing I would advise people. Cold call everybody. Everybody you think can help you, or you think you can help them, and start building relationships.
I'll be fully transparent here. Cold calling is like on a fear factor of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst thing. That's up there near 10. It's just not something I do. So maybe that's something I need to get better at.
You're doing public speaking right here, so it's basically the same thing, right?
It is. And interesting enough, I mentioned this on the podcast, I'm an introvert. If I can just stay home and do what I want to do, everything's great. It's when I have to go out in public. It's not my favorite thing. But yet here I am on a podcast, and I talk way too much, and it's like, well, interesting.
Well, you have a nice controlled environment. I think that's probably
yes. That's probably a big part of it. Yeah, I know what's happening. I know the structure. I know what comes next. I know what happens when I'm finished.
And also, there's an element of pre-selection where you've kind of checked out the people you're going to talk to, or they've been referred by other people. They're not going to be too much of an asshole. So right. So you got a high probability of success for this, Cal.
Right, which helps out. Because I feel like at my point, I don't want to deal with any assholes, just the way I am.
Wouldn't that be nice if we could get away with that?
If we could, all the time, right?
And you got to remember, when you get into the performance art area and putting your stuff out there, especially if there's a comment section below, you're going to deal with some assholes.
That's where they all show up, yeah. I'll be honest, I cringe whenever I get a comment on the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. I'm like, is this a listener? Is this one of those people I don't care to talk
absolutely. Yeah, it's a once you realize that the vast majority of people are just existing in a place where they only care about can they eat it? Is it going to eat me, or can I have sex with it? They're the only three things that most people care about. And then when they try to interact with a piece of content, they just don't have the technology for it. So. But every once in a while, you get really great comments. I mean, and so that's the cool thing about social media is actually it's the new peer review. So I've been asked every question under the sun on my social media, and just for perspective, on TikTok I have 250,000 followers. On Instagram I have about 50,000. So I've had I think my most successful video of all time is like 6.5 million views. So I've been asked every question under the sun. I've been challenged in every area. Every weak point of my philosophy has been challenged and interrogated and pushed and interrogated and pushed, and thousands to my ideas, and in a way that's not possible if you were to get a PhD and then write a paper and then 6 other PhDs went, yep, looks good, you know. So I've
Right, and that's all accurate.
So anyway, I've found a profound benefit from social media in that way. Not to say I haven't had days where it actually ruined my day because people would say something bad about me. And then also there was a point in time where I realized that the human brain evolved in villages of 200, 250 people, so or even smaller. And if two people in this course of a day said something negative to you, that is a huge proportion of the village, and you might be in danger. So your reptile brain is like, I'm in danger if you hear 2 negative comments in the day. And the second that I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, it's just sad internet people, not my village mates who might murder me because clearly people are talking behind my back in the village and they're going to take me down. So It's a great case of don't believe everything you think.
But before we continue on your journey with grazing and your book, how are you marketing your animals in Oregon and in Texas?
In Oregon, we were using Facebook ads. Those worked quite well because it was still early, and my wife is a marketing guru. At this point, I should pause and say that all things have been possible in my life because of my wife. She is...
Yes.
Just absolutely an incredible human being. Her name's Susanna. She said, you need to get on TikTok. You need to get on TikTok. You need to get on TikTok. Okay, fine. So I got on TikTok and everything exploded. Okay, yes, once again, you were right, babe. And then she did all of the marketing for the animals, whether it was in Oregon or in Texas. She did all of that. She is great with details. She did pretty much everything with my book as well, except write it, obviously. So I I wrote the book, and she lined up getting the editors. She lined up getting the proofreaders.
Oh, yeah.
She figured out how to who to get to publish it on Amazon. And then now she's like, you need to make a post about your book. You need to get people to review your book. So she's definitely the driving force, and I pretend like it irritates the shit out of me, and sometimes it does, but she's the best thing for me, and I'm really grateful for her. So big shout out to my lovely wife, Susanna.
Mentioning your book there, what brought you to the point that you thought, I need to share this information in a book?
So I didn't write it to share information. I think that's the biggest misconception that people need to understand about writing a book. You don't, like, how arrogant would you have to be? Like, I'm so smart. People need to know what I know, and I need to share my experience. No, that's not why I wrote. That's not why I wrote the book, Hal. That's not why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I wrote the book because I needed to know what I thought about it. I came into this with thoughts and ideas and opinions, and you can't really know what you think about anything until you write it down. So it was a conversation with my own mind, and then it got far enough down the And in the beginning I thought maybe this will be a book, maybe it'll be something worth doing, and then it just kept going and kept growing, and I kept seeing things that I thought, oh, that would be a great contribution, that would be a great piece, oh, it totally ties in, and then this whole this universe of why continued to grow and continued to expand, and it became long enough where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put this out at this point. And then we started the process of rewriting. I rewrote the book probably 5 times, and then once the book was rewritten 5 times, I went paragraph by paragraph with AI and said, what do you think about this paragraph? And so I treated AI like an editor. So after I rewrote it time after time after time, then I interacted with AI as an editor, and it would suggest, okay, maybe what do you think about changing this sentence here to make the flow better, make it clearer. Okay, cool, let's do that. What about this sentence? No, let's leave that because it destroys my voice if we do that. So it was a very interactive experience, and so I think that was one of the examples of using AI well. And so I didn't write the book to share it. I wrote the book to figure out what I was thinking about the whole damn thing.
And I love that shift on perspective. I want to write a book, but I don't have information to share. I just want the process.
Yeah, that's great. Just fun. Especially after 7 years of sitting there looking at cows and looking at grass and allowing my brain to ruminate on what's actually going on here. And you can't help but a huge percentage of that, a huge part of what's happening there is your own particular experience and disposition interacting with the natural world. And so that's always going to produce a different outcome than if it's just trying to figure out what the physics or the science says. So everybody's trying to figure out the perfect way to graze. That's kind of leaving out the self. And a huge part of why we're doing what we're doing is the self, and what the self really is, how the self interacts with the natural world, how the two interact together. So maybe examining where one stops and the other one begins. Is there even a point where one stops and the other one begins? And so these are all, and so it's just my particular experience, my particular disposition as it relates to how I have interacted with the agroecological world, which is ultimately, in my view, the fabric of reality. That's just a phrase I love so much, because that's what we're dealing with here is the fabric of reality. I don't really conceptualize the world as a bunch of atoms bumping up against each other. I definitely I conceptualize it as more of a dream than anything else.
At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. With your book, as you started through that process, was there anything that jumped out to you, or you're like, wait, I did not expect to reach this point when I started putting down my thoughts?
Yes. The biggest one for me is that I did not expect to discover that basically every indigenous group that I would stumble across had a, and there are exceptions, but a huge number of the indigenous groups, when they would go to their creation myth, the herd animal was a key player in the creation myth. So that was really shocking for me, and it really lent a lot of gravity to this fundamental idea that I have, that human civilization is a derivative of herd activity. And that's one of the things I write about in the book, and it's always stood out to me so much. It's like, you never see hippies at a music festival dancing in tall grass, do you? They don't do that, because the human nervous system is tuned to severely grazed, aka mowed grass. That's where our kids play. And so the only time that ever happened in nature is when you had a massive herd come through, or if there was a fire and there's fresh regrowth. But you go and you look at the body of literature, and there was a whole lot less fire back when those big herds were around. And so you come out with the understanding, or the idea that I have, that it's like, well, it turns out that these herds were going around totally knocking down all of the forage, consuming all the forage, and these huge numbers of animals, and suddenly, for a short time, all the humans could see any of the place where the predators are coming after them. The kids could run around and play. Everything that regrew in that 2, 3, 4 weeks after that was fresh and beautiful and lovely, and humans could identify 250 edible plants at least. So all of these plants that were just having this fresh, beautiful, delicious regrowth were edible. So the herd was this massive reset, and so you can't activate the higher parts of culture building or game building or civilization building. Well, civilization's obviously just a very, very complex game if you're worried that a lion is behind the grass all the time. So it's my thesis that these landscapers, these mowers, and these massive herds created the conditions on an annual or a biannual cycle for humanity to go, oh wait, there's more than just surviving, So that was the thing that was really surprising for me, and I think that notion is hidden in a lot of from the Nordic mythology to Siberian, the Tungus people. It's just obviously the indigenous Americans. It's just the herd animal is preeminent in that story, and I was really surprised to find that and how deep that actually goes. And so that's the thing that was really surprising to me. I had a notion that there was something to this idea that herd animals were more important to who we are as a people than we really think about initially. And I think that's also one of the things that's driving the regenerative movement is people get out around a group of cows and then they look at a freshly grazed pasture and they're like, oh yeah, that feels good. It's the same as somebody looking out and seeing their lawn freshly mowed, but it's like the real thing instead of it's the mowing the lawn is the analog. It's the simulated version, But you see right. the actual life reset with a group of cattle at particularly when you see the ultra high density and they take everything down to the crown, and the dung beetles are going crazy and the birds are following the cattle around, and it's just this perfect refresher, and it's just really, really wonderful. So that was the biggest surprising thing for me was the presence, the sort of that hidden code that herd animals play in the creation myth of so many indigenous cultures.
As I read that in your book, and you talked about games happening on a nice mowed surface, and you brought up the fact, you don't have to worry about predators in tall grass. And to be honest, I really hadn't thought about that till I read it in your book, and I'm thinking about, well, when my grandkids come with me and we go move cattle, which they love to do, I'm like, stay where the cattle have grazed. I'm getting the paddock set up in the other area, and they don't listen real well. But, I do feel more secure when they're there. I love that feeling out there with the cows. So, yeah, that just spoke to me, and I was like, interesting.
That's cool. I've had a few people mention that to me, and it kind of helps put some things together.
And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting in your book, probably at this point, and I'll be on transparency, I got your book last week, and I'm almost finished with it. You notice that word there. We were talking about the importance of words. Almost finished. I'm not quite finished with it, so I may find something more important later in the book. But I'm going to read you a sentence here that you asked yourself, what if I viewed beef not as the byproduct of a healthy functioning ecosystem, but as a waste product? And to me, that's a very interesting paradigm shift. Can you expand on that some?
It's a mental exercise. We all know that there is value in consuming energy. And when something dies, or even when it's alive sometimes, we consume it and it gives us energy. But that is something that is uniform throughout all of creation. Everything that dies is eaten by something else. So why would we use that as a management paradigm? We need to manage things by what they contribute uniquely via their activity while they're alive. So don't be mistaken, and this is not for you, I think you clearly get this, but people listening, don't be mistaken for me to say that, throw the beef in the trash. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying don't think about it. I'm saying it's not worth your mental energy to think about who cares? It's like I had a conversation with a rancher the other day here in Lufkin, and he was talking about how he'd just gotten back from doing ultrasounding the ribeye, the ribeye carcass. And I was just, the whole time he was talking to me, I was just imagining like a Native American standing next to a bison with an ultrasound machine. He's like, not enough ribeye, it's just
Right.
this insane perversion of what we're actually doing on this planet, in my view. Cattle exist to eat grass. They don't exist to give you steak. Cattle exist to eat grass. Oryx existed to eat grass. Bison exist
Right.
to eat grass. They don't exist to give you steak. That just happens to be a really great side effect, and you can't,
Right.
and until you're willing to consider it a waste product, you still have those little seeds of running things and making decisions from the beef product. It is only, and this is going back to my sort of Star Wars analogy, it is only when you consider them completely and totally from the perspective of their ecological function that we can get the systems aligned and optimized. And if we do that, and this is the central thesis of the book, we'll have far more beef than we know what to do with. We'll have fattier beef than we know what to do with, because an ecologically aligned animal is one that puts on fat intramuscularly so they can fight off parasites, so they can get pregnant, so they can stay in good body condition. And so it's like trying to fix your golf swing. We just keep trying to produce more beef by hitting it harder and harder and harder. It's like, fix your form, fix the form first, and then eventually you'll end up hitting the golf ball farther than you would just by trying to hit it harder. And so if we fix our form, which means our genetics and our grazing, and most importantly, the underlying assumptions and principles and philosophies that drive our decision making, then we'll end up with more, better beef in the long term. One of the things, and I'll say this is going to be controversial. One of the things that the American cattle industry loves to say right now is that our herds are at the lowest they've ever been, and in terms of numbers, since the 50s. Our American cattle herd's been at the lowest it's been since the 50s, and we're producing more beef. You know what that means? That means bigger cattle. And bigger cattle are poorer biological functionaries. You have to spend more energy every day keeping the lights on in the body, running metabolic processes. And they produce more beef because it's a function of the fossil fuel and the row crop industry. That's where all that beef is coming from. But beef needs to come from grass, because that's how the blueprint of the planet was designed. That is how the Creator wrote the script. He's like, I'll give you cattle, I'll give you oryx, I'll give you bison. It'll eat the grass, you eat the bison. It's like, cool idea, bro. But what if we got the black goo out, and then we grew corn or soybean and then fed that to the cows? Because I don't think God, I'm pretty sure you're not thinking about the profitability here, and I got to really worry about my quarterly reports. And so, but that's the whole point of my book is that it was a great idea in the 50s and 60s. We had so much, we hadn't even reached the height of our national oil production. That wasn't until the early 70s. And so we still had great soil. We had so much oil you didn't even know what to do with it. And so we started growing all this corn, and people realized, oh my gosh, it's so much more profitable to just put cattle in feedlots and feed them corn. That's way easier. And then that way we don't have to use all this grass to grow out steers. We can have more females, and then the herd just, and it just grows and grows and grows. And then what do we have? And the Panhandle of Texas, where I'm from, is a great example of this. Just completely collapsing ecosystems. Just totally and completely collapsing ecosystems. The Ogallala Aquifer has been sucked dry. You have barns with 18,000 milk cows that go up in flames. It's an ecological disaster. And I'm not saying end that tomorrow. I'm not saying that, because you can't turn a system too fast without massive negative effects. But what I am saying is that here's the ideal. If you don't have an ideal, you don't have something to aim at. So let's aim at that. Let's aim at the ideal. And so there are a lot of us out there who are trying to conceptualize that ideal and give us something to aim at. So that, I mean, this is all a question about waste products. So sorry, go ahead.
Right. When you make a paradigm shift such as viewing beef as the product to being the waste product, profitability is so important for our farms to be sustainable. And that's a big paradigm shift for them. What do you say to that argument? I can't go view it that way because I've got to make a profit so my farm continues.
Well, then that person doesn't understand my argument. My
okay.
My argument is that if you align yourself with nature and voluntary systems, which nature is a voluntary system, then you'll produce more beef. You'll grow more calves per you'll grow more cattle per hectare per acre. You will. The big problem is you do. I get to the heart of your question here. If you can market your own cattle and market your own beef, then great. Then that's what you should do, and you should create because ultimately you're going to grow a better product. If it comes out of the feedlot, it's not as healthy for you as something that comes off a grass finished operation. And period. That's I don't care what kind of propaganda the U.S. beef cattle feeders or whatever tries to tell you. It's not as good for you because it is not in line with its ecological function. Period. Right. The more aligned you are with the blueprint of your life and the blueprint of your existence, the better you are going to feed the next stage of life. That's for sure. There are people who are beholden to certain markets, and I understand that. The U.S. is probably the worst offender because so much of our cattle do end up in a feedlot, and these cattle need to have fast gains, or they need to put on a lot of lean weight, because if you have really great genetically grass adapted cattle, you put them in a feedlot, they immediately start putting on too much fat. They don't put on enough lean meat, and they put on too much fat, and the feedlot can't make money. So they're like, I need these big framey animals. But the problem is, what you end up doing over time is you end up subsidizing the bottom line of these feed yards and the slaughterhouses with the fertility of your soil, because the most ecologically adapted cattle are short, they are heavy, and they fatten easily. And that is the opposite of what a feedlot wants. And so if you are beholden to that, I'm sorry, and that's tough, and maybe but also at the same time, there are a lot of systems in place over history that had to be changed by brave people willing to risk it all. I mean, with that same mentality, it's like, who's going to pick the cotton if I get rid of the slaves? It's like my plantation business is going to fail if I get rid of the slaves. It's like it's the obvious.
Yeah, you're missing the whole point if that's your
right. I mean, and I know that that's the kind of thing, and I'm and I'm not saying that raising the wrong type of cattle is the same as enslaving human beings. I'm not saying
right.
Right. I know somebody's going to try to put those together, but that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the future, God's will, I use that phrase in my book, the Emerson quote, God's work will not be made manifest by cowards. And I view the blueprint of planet Earth as God's work, and I am going to do everything I can to make it manifest, and I don't care if it's worth doing if I fail. If I fail, it's worth doing. Because eventually we're all going to die anyway. What do you think, you're not going to die and you're going to get some, you think you're going to go to heaven and there's going to be somebody from the US cattle feeders there to hand you a certificate? Like, I don't think so. So it's our job on this planet is to exhaust ourselves in service of the ecosystem and other forms of life, and then die. Like, that's our job on this planet. And that's what I intend to do. That's what I'm going to do. And if you have to continue doing something that you don't want to do, I mean, that's the bottom line. Is if you're the kind of person, if you love what you're doing and you're getting good results and you can justify it, and then hey, keep right on. But if you know in your heart you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, and you're only doing it because of your profit motive, then that's between you and God. So So I'm willing to put myself on the line. I'm willing to put my family on the line to do what I consider to be the right thing. And the right thing to me is an ecologically optimized grazing system that is planetary, and that's what I want. And I'm also not one of these people who's like, everybody in ag needs to stick together. It's like we need to support each other. And it's like, imagine if lawyers did that. And it's like, no, sorry, we can't argue against the other lawyer because we're both lawyers.
Yeah.
It's the most ridiculous idea that I've ever heard. That I see that all the time. It's like regenerative and conventional people start arguing, and somebody inevitably comes in the comments and they're like, wait guys, we all got to stick together because we're ag. And it's like, no, we're also ecologists versus protein producers. It's like it's however you want to split it. And it's also you can split human beings and what they do into an infinite number of pieces and descriptions. Mm-hmm. So I think that the war of ideas is extremely important. I think there's nothing that's too small or too unimportant to fight over. And I think that the fight happening right now for the future of agriculture, if we're going to go with the question is, on one side you have people saying we need to make nature more efficient, and that means putting everything into human terms, the human system, putting everything into human terms, the human system, lots, we need to make nature more efficient. And on the other side you have people like an ecology that functions well, and healthier, safer food, more stable landscapes, more stable environments, which create more stable weather patterns, which create more stable climates. I'm not a climate doomer, but I do know that regulated systems create regulated systems. And if you have a more regulated functional ecosystem, you're going to have a more regulated functional climate. That's just the bottom line. And you're also a well-functioning regulated system will buffer the extreme ends of that, whether it's massive floods or massive droughts. If you have a more regulated ecosystem, you bring in the extremes. That's just sort of systems theory. So yes, I mean, if to just bring that point home, that's up to the individual person, and markets will not change if individuals don't change. Imagine if, it's like when Henry Ford started mass producing the first car, people asked him, he said, if people had asked me what they wanted, they would have said, if I had asked people what they want, they would have said a faster horse. And the same with Steve
Right,
Jobs.
yeah.
If when he was making the iPhone, if he had asked people what they would have wanted, he would have said a better BlackBerry. So it's incumbent upon us to tell a better story. Life is very simple. He who tells the best story wins. That's why there's a part of my book describing the two stories, the story of force and the story of harmony. So it's like whoever tells the better story wins. And that's what it's like. The cathode ray TV didn't go out because we said, we need to stop making cathode ray TVs. We just made a better TV. Elon Musk made a better car with Tesla. It's not because it's an electric car, it's a better car. We need to tell a better story and make a better product. And grass-finished beef grass-finished beef is a better story. The vast majority of people who don't want to eat grass-finished beef is because they've been propagandized into and this is my view, and other people may disagree, have been propagandized into the taste of feedlot beef, and also if you're a little kid, that's what you grow up eating it. But conversely, thousands of generations of their ancestors grew up eating natural food, which were natural animals, and none of them probably complained. They're like, the fat in this is the wrong color. So it's we got to make a better product, a more nutrient dense product, a more energy dense product. This is one that's interesting to me. Is like if you have animals that fatten easily on grass, they have a higher percentage of fat deposition to lean meat deposition. That means they are more energy dense. That means you get more energy per bite. And if it costs them less energy to deposit that energy in their bodies, then that's making efficiency more natural. The feedlot version is obviously you just pump hot food, high energy feeds into these animals until they're their genetics, which prefer to put on lean meat, have to start putting on intermuscular fat. And then we start going, oh, we got to select for genes to put on intermuscular fat. We got to select for ribeye area. We got to, and we're chasing her. It's like this Tower of Babel where we're trying to artificially create this agricultural heaven, and all we have to do is pay attention to fertility. And that's one thing that's what Johan and Jaime and Joel will all tell you. And the way that I frame it is that the fertility is the convergence point of all meaningful ecological and economic traits. So if we just pay attention to fertility, which cow calves the earliest, who matures the earliest, and then has the shortest inner calving period, and you just pay attention to that, and you'll have animals that just continue to get better and continue to get better and continue to get better. But we're chasing all these irrelevant considerations. And I had a conversation with a guy who was a seed scientist over in Africa a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the same thing. The more we select for certain traits in these seeds, individual traits, and try to bring them out, the more downstream weird stuff starts happening. And so that's what we're seeing with the cattle world, and that's the only way backwards is just pay attention to fertility. Fertility is the most important piece. Yeah. We can accelerate natural selection by paying attention to fertility. You want to get me back on track, because I'll talk.
Well, I like that. I don't want to go too much in genetics today. It's definitely a topic I'd like to get into another time. But it just takes me back. Zeitzman talks about it in his book. You go to Lasseter's philosophy. Mm-hmm. Tom Lasseter talks about the fertility and quit measuring all these extra things. Just get an animal that works in the environment they're going to be in and quit worrying about everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's why I'm probably not your guy to talk about genetics, honestly, because I think Mother Nature and God has it pretty simplified. It's like fertility takes over the world. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what all invasive species are, right? You're more fertile in your environment. So that's it.
Right. Just a little bit more on that. You talked about using a British breed in Oregon. You talked in Texas using Corriente. In Australia, you're working with more of a Bremer base. How are there certain breeds you're going out there and infusing in the drive to get fertility, or are you selecting from within those herds to build more of the animal that's needed?
Both. Well, primarily the reason that I selected all those different animals is because it's the available, appropriate base from which to start to create your own adapted breed. So with the cattle in Oregon, I was using small frame Angus, a lot of Aberdeen Angus crosses, or lowline as they used to be called, and then I was AIing Mashona into them. So, and then same thing I was using Mashona bulls here in Texas as well, and creating some really, really beautiful, and Joel has all those animals now actually, and some really nice Corriente, and he uses piney woods, so obviously, what do they call it? Congeners, the same, very, very similar animals. And I love the Corriente because they're cheap and they're readily available. And you can just keep breeding back to them until you've bred out all of the undesirable elements of the Corriente, which is basically just their frame. You put more heft on them with those African genetics, and then you're going to be in good shape. And in Australia, the Brahman is just what's there, and it's what the market wants. And there are certain areas where in the Northern Territory, the only option is the boat market, the live export to Indonesia. And for some reason, the Indonesians, it's a totally strange thing. The Indonesians love lean beef. They want their lean beef. I'm not sure it's cultural or what. And they only want white, really, really eared Brahman. They won't take blacks. They won't take crossbreds. They won't take brindles. The boats just want the high content Brahman. Malaysia, they're happy to take red cattle because red is the lucky color in Malaysia. Vietnam will take other cattle as well. It's these are all of these things, these decisions that are made not from an ecological standpoint. When you get over into Queensland, with the northeast part of Australia, and on the northeast part of Australia, you'll see that there's a peninsula right on the top called the Cape York Peninsula, and the Cape York Peninsula is about the size of New York, and only 30,000 people live there, and it's 6 months of wet and then 6 months of dry, brutal conditions, it's the worst forage quality I've ever seen anywhere. You know, you're going to get, maybe for a tiny percentage of the year, you'll get up to maybe 8-9% protein, but the rest of the year it's in bad shape. But people continue to try to satisfy the market there, so they have these big 1,200-pound Brahman cows, and they're all in poor thrift, and you get, you know, weaning rates below 50%, and you may get a calf every 18 months. And you know, to me, I see that, and I examine it from a first principle standpoint. I'm like, this is totally unecologically aligned. But the biggest problem there are people problems, not genetic problems.
Right.
So
yeah.
those are problems that are easily solved, but coming up with the personnel and the buy-in to do it is the real challenge. So, but also there are some market realities. You know, you get penalized if you bring in an animal for slaughter under a certain size, which we all know, but that's going to be solved with AI-driven slaughterhouses. They already have completely robotic-driven lamb slaughterhouses in New Zealand. So, you know, for instance, Cape York Peninsula, what that area needs is a 300-kilogram cow. They need a 650-pound cow, and anything bigger than that, you're going to lose fertility, you're going to lose productivity. And they need a lot of them. And then you grow those out today, you know, you have nowhere to sell them. But so people just continue to try to exist, find this fine line between marketability and fertility. And so, you know, it's this race to find this ultra thin line where you can then hopefully break even, which regularly doesn't happen. So it tells me a complete new shift has to happen, and that new shift is going to be driven by technological integration, data. It's going to be driven by the ability to get these cattle to an AI-driven slaughterhouse on a semi-regular basis. Obviously, in Cape York Peninsula, it would have to be during the 6 months of dry season. But you know, Asia is right there. You know, it's like there are, you know, there are like 50 million new Chinese are rising into the middle class by 2040, and they're demanding more beef, more protein in their diet from beef. The opportunity is there, and somebody's going to figure out how to do it. And once again, this just all goes back to me thinking, okay, if I built this system from a completely ecologically aligned standpoint, I would say, okay, well, we need ecologically adapted animals. We got to have a way to transport them. We need a way to export them. We need a way to slaughter them effectively. And you know, and I have a whole plan in my mind and on paper on how to do that. But it has to be done in steps over time. But so then always it comes down to what can be done now, and do we have the bravery to do that? And sometimes it's very difficult because once again, you know, the finance guys, they're worried about their finance guys are employed to prevent you from doing innovative things because they don't want the fear of loss is a far more motivating factor than the possibility of gain. So people who are visionary and people who are innovative, you know, it's always just sort of swimming upstream against the spreadsheet people. Which, hey, I value spreadsheet people. I appreciate spreadsheet people. I just think that sometimes we get we forget, you know, what the blueprint of planet Earth is, and that we have a moral obligation to do brave, true things in the short time we're on the planet.
I want to jump back. It's just a very minor thing, which you're going to be like, why? After I said all that, you got to ask this. But the Brahmas in Australia, are we talking American
Yes.
Brahmas? Okay, I didn't realize they were that prevalent.
Yeah, it's the dominant breed in northern Australia for sure. It was in the very beginning, in the late 1800s. They started with Afrikaners, and the first settlers had some Afrikaners, and then after that, it was all Shorthorn, and so the feral cattle up there, which are just some of them are just beautiful. Actually, the best cattle I saw up there had elements of all three: Shorthorn, Brahman,
yeah.
and you could maybe see a little bit of Afrikaner in those cattle. They call them clean skins, obviously, because they're not branded, and they're the downside is, like many wild herds, they haven't had thousands and thousands of years to optimize their fertility, but they still outperform those Brahman by a lot, and it's just they just don't have the size to them to satisfy the current existing market. They don't grow fast enough, so people just think they're trash cattle. Although, if you go out to if those stations will go out to do what's called a killer, to kill an animal and butcher it and hang it up in the meat freezer, they'll always kill one of the Peninsula Reds. What's what they call them, Peninsula Reds, because they taste better. They're a far better eating animal than the Brahman. Yet which is one of those sort of fundamental misalignments that the animals being raised for sale taste more poorly than the ones that have sort of nativized. but what they have, the problem is they have no way to select to enhance natural selection, because all of the males out there are constantly running around trying to breed all of the females, and so you have the less good males breeding all the females. So it's a much slower nativization process. And so what needs to happen up there is the infusion of African genetics, the tagging and digital records of all these animals, identifying the earliest maturing ones. The average cow up there doesn't have her first calf until she's 4. Yeah, it's it's the average cow doesn't reach puberty until she's in like 2.5. So, the solution is there in the African genetics. The best possible outcome, I think, from what I can tell, is that you would have a massive influx of Afro-Zebu, which is generally an Angoni crossed with a Boran. And they're using those in Zambia. They're a very small framed animal, but there's no better animal on poor forage, except maybe like the really small cattle that are indigenous to Southeast Asia. There are some really incredible animals there too. They're just too small for the labor unit economics of the slaughterhouses. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. The ecology demands a smaller framed animal to perform its function well, but the artificial human driven markets demand a larger frame animal, which has downstream negative ecological effects. There were 150 what's the right number? So let me get this number right. There were 150,000 cattle on the Cape York Peninsula in 1950. Now there is only a third of that, 50,000.
Oh,
so
yes.
Because the animals keep getting bigger and the forage keeps getting poorer, and it used to be able to hold 150,000 cows. How can we go back that direction? Not the same direction we've been going, that's for sure. So any of you Americans who are out there listening, and sorry for the whole spiel about Australian cattle, I'm sure. I wonder if it's useful at all.
I find it very interesting. I'm enjoying. We had Badcock from Zambia, and he's talking about the cattle he's using over there, the smaller sizes you mentioned.
Oh yeah. They're probably Johan lives in Zambia now, as you probably know, and he's got a lot of Angoni cattle, and that's another one of the things that we really need to figure out how to do is to get the government agencies in charge of biosecurity to figure out how we can get these ecologically adapted genetics across the world. Because Australia has the most intense biosecurity laws basically on the planet, because they're obviously a giant island. They have no rabies. They are very, very careful, and as they should be. But also at the same time, they have a big problem in terms of the genetics in their northern cattle, and they also have a big problem in what the market demands. So we have some things we need to figure out. And Australia has the world's only regulated carbon market. So my view is that the carbon regulators and the people who are in charge of biosecurity need to get together and go, okay, we need to figure out how to get the most ecologically adapted animals or their genetics from Central Africa, where they're growing in similar environments to Northern Australia. We got to figure out how to do a special transfer and get these genetics over here. And because it's crucial to the future of the industry, as far as I'm concerned.
I was just reading an article earlier today about Australian sheep breeder and talking about foot rot and what they're breeding. But in the article, they were talking about they can't import lambs, rams, semen from New Zealand. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. That close, and they can't do any of that.
Yeah. It's the biosecurity state is extremely intense, and I think the way through that is nobody in a country that cares about the environment to the point where they will create a government regulated carbon industry is not going to be convinced through the protein production story. They will be convinced through the climate and ecology story. And that is because it is more true. It is more in line with the blueprint of reality. And so that is why I think the climate and carbon regulators and the biosecurity people need to get together and have that story told so that we can get the best genetics from across the world to be able to perform those ecological functions. And a lot of people in Australia, the big pushback is there's never been a hoofed animal in Australia, so it's not native. Like, number one, cattle are not going away in Australia. Number two, there actually was a hoofed animal. The giant short-faced kangaroo had a hoof, so there was a hoofed animal. And number three, the more fundamental issue here is the digestive technology. In the book, I write about the two digestive technologies, ruminants and hindgut fermenters working together. Australia had that same thing. They had giant wombats that were migratory. Wombats, those short little marsupials that poop cubes.
Yes.
And they were 3,000 kilograms, I believe. They had almost a 10,000. I think that's right. It's either way. I think it could be up to 1,500 kilograms. I want to look that up and get it right. But the bottom line is they were ruminants. I'm sorry, they were hindgut fermenters, and they 1,000 pounds. How did I have that one so wrong? This is actually important for me to look up here. Possibly as much as 3,500 kilograms. Okay, I was right. So you had basically an almost 10,000 pound migrating hindgut fermenter, which that's basically an elephant. That's an elephant, basically.
Yeah.
Walking around, and you had all kinds of species of kangaroos, which are foregut fermenters, which is a very close to a ruminant. A ruminant is a foregut fermentation. So you had these two technologies going around performing that migratory forage reset. So it's actually kind of unimportant that there were fewer hooved animals because the impact was there. The animals were migrating and moving, and the impact was there. So Australia needs that same activity of optimized grazing to increase ecological function, the same as the rest of the planet.
Now, you mentioned something there before we wrap up and go to famous for. You mentioned hindgut fermenters versus foregut, and most of our animals are foregut. When we're talking about ultra high density, we're talking about using those fermenters in that system. Is there a need to have some hindgut fermenters in there? Or are we able to mimic that enough with the foregut fermenters?
You can. Certainly, people use meat horses in Mexico. People use mules. People use donkeys. They do a great job. But I think the more functional aspect is that the ruminants have to be grazed in such a way where they mimic and where they simulate the hindgut fermenters. And what that means is during the best times of year where the forage is the best, they take that forage all the way to the ground. They go ahead and do the clean, severe graze. And then also that requires, and I'm sure Jaime got into this quite a lot, chasing the green grass, right? So you go back to the beginning of the rotation when you're at that high protein stage in the grass. It's what Johan would call a planned overgraze. And then in the non-growing season, you go through your deferred forage, your stockpile, which is another part of this whole system. and you support that higher harvest efficiency with protein and energy supplement where needed. So, which is ultimately cheaper than feeding hay and much better for the ecology, because as Jaime, I'm sure, laid out for you beautifully, that it's in those areas that are deferred for the whole year where you get real MAOC long-term carbon buildup. So you have to deploy the ruminants as doing the job of ruminants and hindgut fermenters using protein supplement. So, and then you need to have a clear, you need to create a clear cut, a clear recycling, and that all of that forage needs to go through the digestive system and be deployed on the ground as fertilizer. So, yes, we have to figure out how ruminants can most effectively utilize forage as a hindgut fermenter would.
Hobbs, really appreciate the discussion. Before we move to the famous four, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think we've covered it quite well, Cal. I appreciate all your questions. I think that it's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you tolerating my weaving.
You know, I think listeners of the podcast are like I would be when I talk to myself. Sometimes my thought pattern's kind of random, so I think my listeners probably put up with it.
That's good. I've discovered over time that the most important part is I can ramble I think this is actually what Donald Trump does too. I can ramble as much as I want and go off on as many tangents as I want, as long as I bring it back to the core of the question at the end. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's something that's taken a bit of practice.
Oh yeah, that weave there. Our famous four questions are the same four questions we ask of all of our guests. And our first question, what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource? And I know initially you're going to say this book called Herd by this Hobbs guy, but beyond that.
I actually have the same answer for all people in this regard. The most important grazing book, the most important book on ranching I have ever read is called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Oh, yes.
Because it doesn't matter how good of a grazer you are, it doesn't matter how good at animal nutrition you are, it doesn't matter any of those things. If you can't get people on your side and you can't get people on your team, then you can't move the world. You can't make good things happen for you. It's probably the most important book that I've ever read, and a lot of people think it's a guide for manipulation. And at first, when people who read it, who are not used to being genuinely interested in other people, read it, it can feel that way. But the more it sort of sinks into your bones, the more you just find yourself actually being interested in other people and realizing that the only way to get what you want in life is to give other people what they want. So, and finding ways to build connections with people. So I think the book that can make people's grazing careers improve the most is How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Excellent resources there, but I don't believe, I know, it's not been recommended in this segment of the Famous Four before on the podcast, so nice. Very good.
Nice. What curiosity? What's the most popular? What are the top 3 most popular recommendations?
Usually a Alan Nation book, a Alan Savory book, or a Greg Judy book. Those are basically just kind of some Sand Country Almanac gets recommended a fair amount. I think that really sums it up. Those 3 authors probably get recommended more than
Interesting.
anyone else.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. Our second question, what is your favorite tool for the ranch?
Cell phone.
Again, an answer I didn't anticipate. So expand why it's the most important.
Because the only way to try to do anything on the ranch that is meaningful for how the ranch interacts with the rest of the world without using a cell phone. It's you can record yourself talking, you can make calls, you can track your data with your animals, your grazing management. It's an incredibly useful tool. You can tell your wife you're going to be late for dinner. Those are all very,
which is probably the most important of all those features.
Right. And I say that specifically because I have gotten the most benefit. The reason I have been able to go from basically nothing to slightly more than nothing, but only very slightly, is because I've been able to tell my story, and it's technology and cell phone and social media that have been able to help me do that.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Yeah, amazing tool there that we often don't think about, that it's always within a few feet of me, which can be a negative or a positive. Our third question, what would you tell someone just getting started?
If it's worth doing, it's worth failing at.
Yeah, excellent advice.
The reason I say that is because there are a lot of things, a lot of decisions that you have to make that could go sideways. But if it's in line with what you think is right and what you think is if there's one thing about me that's maybe a little bit unusual is that I'm ready to die. You know, I could go today. I'm fine. I'm ready to go. And so all fear and anxiety is just a manifestation of fear of death. And fear of failure is ultimately fear of death. Why you're afraid of your reputation being savaged or running out of food. This is all a manifestation of the fear of death. And if you can overcome that and be willing to fail, then you can do the right thing. And the world needs more people who are willing to do the right thing, with the recognition that the ultimate conclusion of doing the right thing could be somebody kills you for it. So, or it causes you to fail so badly that you end up dying or whatever. You go down a deep, dark rabbit hole of whatever, you know. So if you're going to do it, go all the way. Don't half-ass it. And only do things that are worth doing, even if you fail.
Yeah, excellent advice. Our fourth question, where can others find out more about you?
My Instagram is my first name dot my last name. TikTok is first name dot my last name. Hobbs Magaret. You're welcome to Google me. Please try to spell the last name right. It's going to try to get you to say, "Did you mean Hobbs Magaret?" But no. Spell it correctly, and you'll find all kinds of podcasts I've been on. I mean, I think this podcast probably covers pretty much everything I've talked about on other podcasts. Maybe I have slightly different ideas now than I have in the past. But they're all weird, so you'll get weirdness wherever you go. So TikTok, Instagram, I think it cross-posts to Facebook. I don't have access to Facebook, but I think all my Instagram stuff cross-posts onto a Facebook over there. So there's plenty of stuff out there, and most importantly, you can read my book. So
yeah, don't forget your book.
I'm new to plugging the book. So go on Amazon. The title of the book is Herd: The Animals That Gave Rise to Humanity and Why We Need Them More Than Ever. And it's a weekend read. It's like 165 pages total, printed pages, super easy to read. I worked very hard to make it approachable. The first version, my wife was like, "What is this, dude? This is not good. You have got to make this more approachable." She's like, "Babe, nobody wants to hear you talk about axiomatic presuppositions, okay? Let's talk about fundamental principles instead. You need to rewrite this." So I worked very hard to make it approachable, inclusive, not antagonistic. I mean, I may have come across a little bit antagonistic at certain points during this podcast, which I certainly didn't mean to do, because although we are all in this together, but at a certain point we need to have robust and vigorous debate and discussion. But I wrote the book to be inclusive of as many people and as many thought patterns and as many cultures and many ways of doing things as I possibly could. So go out and get it, and if you do get it, please leave me a review on Amazon. So luckily it's the best-selling new release in ecology, animal husbandry, and sustainable agriculture, which is pretty cool because the thesis of the book is that ecology, animal husbandry, and sustainable agriculture are the same thing. So that's pretty cool. People are enjoying it. It's already on the curriculum for the sustainability bachelor's degree at a university in Madrid, Spain. So that's pretty satisfying. The foreword is by Dr. Jeff Goodwin, who runs the Center for Grazing Lands and Ranch Management at Texas A&M. So He's a great guy. If you haven't had him on the podcast, fantastic resource, really smart guy. And I hope you guys enjoy the book. I'm really interested to get some feedback, figure out what I got wrong, figure out what I got right, and see what we can do for the next one.
Very good. I am enjoying it. Like I said, I'm almost finished with. We had grandkids this weekend, so my weekend didn't have enough time in it, but I got to spend a lot of time with my grandkids, which
Fantastic.
is
Yeah,
always great.
absolutely. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Before we wrap up and end today's show, do you have a question for me, Hobbs?
Oh, are you gonna? Yeah, I have a question for you. Are you going to? Why didn't you use my book as bedtime stories?
Well, that is a really good question. They didn't. I have books and I have stuff I'm always reading with me, but very few people want me to read them out loud, and I just don't know why. I guess it's my voice.
You have a very sonorous voice, Cal. It's very, very beautiful. So I thank you very much for putting on this podcast and inviting me to be on it. And it was a pleasure to be here. So what have you gotten out of the podcast? What's been the most rewarding part about doing the podcast for you?
Overall, or this episode?
Overall, yeah.
It's the building of the network. You mentioned earlier relationships and cold calling people. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a cold calling person. In fact, when my phone rings, I have a slight bit of panic that I have to talk to someone on the phone, and I didn't rehearse the conversation. So that's where I go. But the building of the network, getting people in here, talking about what they're doing, thinking about and applying that to what I'm evaluating, reflecting upon what I'm doing so I can do a better job. But building that relationship with all these people has been tremendous, and the amount of people that I can pick up the phone and call, and it's not a cold call, is really nice. And the second thing that really comes from this, when you go to a conference, and I've talked about this on a podcast before, you go to a conference and you get that energy from everyone else, and you come home and you're willing to do great things, whatever the subject is. This podcast is like a mini dose of that
that's
energy.
Great.
Each podcast episode I do, and I hope for the listeners it's the same thing. They get just that little shot. Some days your motivation's lacking. Some days your discipline could be better. But maybe this podcast can encourage you to do that next step that you need to do.
That's awesome. It's a conference in a can.
Conference in a can. Yes, that's the best description or definition of a podcast I've ever heard. Conference in a can.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you, Cal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hobbs. I appreciate you coming on. My two takeaways from the conversation with Hobbs today both come from his book and the conversation. I think both were brought up today. One is viewing beef as a waste product rather than a byproduct. And I just think that paradigm shift to viewing cattle as a way to manage your ecosystem, to be that keystone species, and viewing beef as the byproduct is a good shift. I'm not sure what I gain by going a step further and deciding it's a waste product, and if I do, how does that change what I'm doing? I get when I take and beef is no longer my focus, but beef is the byproduct. In that case, then I'm doing what's best for the land, and the beef I produce is a byproduct that I'm trying to maximize. I don't know what I get from going that next step to the waste, to making it a waste product, but it's an interesting thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Jump over to the Grazing Grass community and share them. The other thing is the position of hindgut fermenters in our ecosystems. Now, granted, as we compress compact cows and force them to be non-selective in what they're eating, they can eat those forages that we or the hindgut fermenters would be eating, those low quality stuff. So you're forcing your cattle to consume everything there, so non-selective. So they're grazing that lower quality stock or forage as well as the higher quality stuff. But does that mean Maybe we should be having some hindgut fermenters in there. I know when we've talked with other producers, some of them are running some donkeys. A lot of people have horses. What if you incorporate those into your grazing management rather than leaving them in a lot by the house? Of course, you lose some of that easy to get to. I don't know. All questions I don't have answers for, but I'm here with you as we work through this and hopefully come to a better understanding. I really enjoyed Hobbs coming on today and sharing. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grazing Grass Podcast, where we bring you stories and insights into grass-based livestock production. If you're new here, we've got something just for you. Our new listener resource guide is packed with everything you need to get started on your listening journey with the Grazing Grass Podcast. It gives you more information about the podcast, about myself, and next steps. You can grab your free copy at grazinggrass.com/guide. Don't miss out. And hey, do you have a grazing story to share? We're always looking for passionate producers to feature on the show. Whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, your story matters. Head over to grazinggrass.com/guest to learn more and apply to be a guest. We'd love to share your journey with our growing community of grazers. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.